What's happening, all you lovely people? Welcome back on my channel, Danny FYR. I'm Danny B, aka Stan, aka whatever the you wanna call me. And it's a lovely day here in the northeast of England. I've just come back from a morning walk there. It's a very nice day, so I hope it's pleasurable spring day wherever you are in the world. For today's video, we've got another Mr. Ballin. It's a subscriber suggestion again. Kylie Nagy, you know who you are. Yes. So we're gonna go with it. The biggest fail in military history. So let's see what this one's about. I know which country I would like to see be the biggest fail in military history at the moment, but let's not get on to that, eh? Right, let's get into this video. The biggest fail in military history by Mr. Ballin. Let's go.
No matter how absurd this story gets, just remember, it's true. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3 or 4 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please beg the like button to have them give you their secret chocolate chip cookie recipe, and then when they finally cave, and they do give it to you, immediately post it on Facebook with the caption, "Here's my chocolate chip cookie recipe." Also, please subscribe to our channel.
I don't know how he sits there and writes something different for every time he says that. Hit the like button. But also subscribe to my channel. Hit the like button. Please subscribe.
And turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's story.
Baltic Fleet.
Around the turn of the 20th century, Russia and Japan got into a dispute over who should be in control of Korea and China. Looking to avoid an armed conflict, the Japanese sent the Russians a deal that came with reasonable concessions on both sides. But the Russians didn't like it, they rejected the deal, and they countered with a pretty unreasonable deal that came with lots of concessions for Japan and not so many for Russia. And so Japan rejected that deal and then promptly launched a devastating surprise attack on the Russian Navy stationed at Fort Arthur in China. This attack would officially start the 1-year-long Russo-Japanese War. The Russians knew they would need to send a replacement naval fleet up to Fort Arthur to reclaim it from the Japanese, but unfortunately, the attack at Fort Arthur had totally wiped out all of Russia's best sailors and all their best ships, putting Russia at a major disadvantage to start this war. And so as Russians are wondering what they're going to do next, the Russian Emperor, Tsar Nicholas II, authorizes an unbelievable mission. He orders the Russian Baltic Fleet to set sail from their harbor in northern Europe and sail 18,000 miles around the world to Japan, where they will defeat the Japanese and then reclaim Fort Arthur. The fact that none of the Baltic Fleet ships were designed to sail that far of a distance, or that there were literally 0 refueling points along their massive projected path, was considered largely inconsequential and ignored. What was also considered inconsequential was how absurdly unqualified the Baltic crew was.
I mean, we want to get into it. It's reflected in today's Russian army. I mean, what we're being told is half of them don't want to be there. They didn't know why they were entering Ukraine anyway. The generals are just, no good. I mean, it's just a reflection of today, that.
The sailors were mostly illiterate peasants that did not grow up on the coasts, and so they showed up for military training with no seafaring skills. And then after their military training, they still had no seafaring skills because the Baltic Fleet's harbor was frozen solid almost year-round. But the Tsar believed the man he had put in charge of this crew, Admiral Rojesvenski, would make up for their deficiencies. And this belief was not unwarranted. Admiral Rojesvenski was the best Russian officer that had not been killed in that Japan surprise attack. He had significant combat experience, and he had a wickedly bad temper. He didn't care who you were. If you were doing something he didn't like, Baltic, he was going to beat the crap out of you. Literally. And when he was told he was going to be in charge of this fairly inexperienced crew, he was certain his rough style would whip these Baltic boys into shape and they would be very successful. But when he laid eyes on the Baltic fleet, he realized this was going to be a little bit more challenging than he realized. In addition to being less than satisfied with his fighting crew, he was equally dissatisfied with the two senior officers that were assigned to be his direct support. And he immediately gave them nicknames, and he would only refer to them by their nicknames, right to their face. The first one was the manure sack, and the other was a vast empty space. As for the Baltic Fleet's 45 ships...
that doesn't say a lot about those officers then, does it? What was it? The manure sack and the empty space? Oh my lord.
They were terrible. Because this unit never went out on the ocean because their harbor was always frozen, Russia didn't waste their good ships on them. So all they had were really old, obsolete warships and then non-military ships like ferries and yachts that they just slapped random guns onto. They also had ships that the Baltic Fleet crew enthusiastically called futuristic, which were these ships that came out of Russia briefly copying French engineering, which involved these crazy top-heavy ships that sat so low in the water that their lowest rung of weapons, their cannons that poked out the windows at the bottom of the ship, they didn't work because they sat under the water permanently. But regardless of their shortfalls, the Baltic Fleet was what Rojesvenski had been dealt, and so he had to just get them moving if they were going to win the war. And so on October 16th, 1904, Admiral Rojesvenski ordered all of his men to take their positions in all of their ships, and they set sail. And immediately, 30 seconds into their trip, the lead ship ran aground, and another ship lost its anchor, even though it should not have been casting its anchor to begin with. And so while one ship is trying to float, and the other is trying to find its anchor in the ocean, a third ship comes along and broadsides a fourth ship. And it does so much damage to this fourth ship, that ship had to go back home. But once the...
What was going on, man? It sounds like my kids could have captained them ships better. Wow.
They overcame these initial obstacles. The Baltic Fleet, that now numbered 44 ships, made it out of the harbor without any more issues, and then set sail for the narrow waters between Denmark and Sweden. As they drew closer, Manure Sack informed Rojesvenski that there might be an issue, that he had heard rumblings amongst the crew that they believed Japanese torpedo boats were stationed off the coast of Denmark waiting for them to get there. Rojesvenski told Manure Sack that that was impossible. The Japanese torpedo boats did not have the capabilities to sail 18,000 miles to Denmark. And even if they did have the ability to do that, they could not have gotten there in such a short period of time. But Manure Sack told Rojesvenski that unfortunately, even though logically that makes sense, this rumor had spread all across the crew. And so Rojesvenski began sending out messages to all the other ships, telling them there are no Japanese torpedo boats waiting for us off the coast of Denmark. Everybody just needs to calm down. And these messages did appear to work at first, because eventually another rumor began to circulate, one that Rojesvenski was not really aware of as it was happening, and that was that the crew began to believe there was a huge minefield underneath them, everywhere they went.
But imagine if that proper did sink into all them sailors on all them boats. I mean, it'd just be carnage. If you're thinking mines, I mean, but as a sailor, you've got to be prepared for those types of things though, don't you? You know what I mean? So, my opinion. Let me know yours.
There was a minefield, and everybody got so worked up about it that it made its way back to a lot of the captains actually piloting the different ships. And at some point, the pilots just began doing these evasive maneuvers,
causing chaos,
looking around, wondering what they're doing, and they began crashing into each other, trying to avoid this minefield. When Rojesvenski finally figured out what was going on, he sent out even more messages telling them that there's no minefield under us. It's totally safe. Everybody just needs to calm down. And so it took Rojesvenski going out on deck and firing shots into the air to finally get people to stop believing they were on top of a minefield.
That's crazy. Rumours starting losing more ships. They're crashing into each other, trying to dodge a non-existent minefield. I mean, it's Russia.
Just a couple of hours later, after Rodospensky had gone back up to the bridge and was just looking out, surveying his fleet as they carried on towards Denmark and Sweden, when all of a sudden, towards the very front of his fleet, he heard this unbelievable barrage of cannon fire. One of his own ships was engaging something out in front of the fleet. But Rodospensky was too far away to see what it was, and then a message came through from the attacking ship, whose name was Kamchatka, and they said they were surrounded on all sides by at least 8 Japanese torpedo boats. And so Rodospensky runs out onto the deck, looking out towards the horizon, expecting to see these 8 Japanese ships, but he doesn't. And then all of a sudden, the shooting just completely stops and it's silent. And then Rodospensky notices on his right side a small little fishing boat is making its way right up alongside his. It would turn out Kamchatka, the attacking ship, had confused this little unarmed Russian fishing ship with 8 Japanese torpedo boats and had opened fire. But luckily, even though they fired hundreds and hundreds of rounds,
Still didn't hit them.
None of them hit the boat, so the fishermen were fine. And the fishermen actually
thank the Lord, like, I know,
specifically
but,
by
you
Tsar
know,
Nicholas II
that
to tell
is crazy.
Rodospensky that he had been promoted. And so Rodospensky apologizes to the fishermen for having shot at them hundreds and hundreds of times.
That's crazy. And they still never hit them. I mean, thank the Lord for that, you know, but it just goes to show how unskilled and how unprepared they were, not trained they kind of been.
And they said it's okay, and the fishermen carried on. After Rodospensky chewed out the crew of the Kamchatka, the rest of the Baltic fleet gathered up, and they continued towards the narrow waters between Denmark and Sweden. When they got close, a Danish resupply ship came out to meet them to give them fuel and food and water, and the Baltic fleet mistook them for a Japanese torpedo, causing them to ram them repeatedly. And then they realized their mistake, but at that point they had done severe damage to the resupply ship, who had to immediately turn around and go back to shore. After that, the Baltic fleet did manage to get past Denmark and Sweden, and they made it out to the North Sea. But it's
Right, they've got out to the North Sea. That's my area of the world. The North Sea's about 6 miles in that direction for me. So they've got out into the North Sea, but they've already sabotaged their own operation, and they've only just got to the North Sea now. I mean, they've crashed into each other. Sabotaging just everything, sabotaging their own mission, zigzagging, crashing into each other before they'd even got out of harbour, crashing into each other. Crazy.
As soon as they got out there was trouble. One of the
Eve to me is basically freedom. It's a giant open universe where you can do whatever you want.
The captains of the ships that was towards the front of the Baltic Fleet's formation spotted 4 Japanese torpedo boats coming right at them. And so this ship, along with 6 others, immediately just began engaging these 4 ships with everything they had. Cannons, big guns, small guns, everything. It was absolute chaos from the front of this formation. And the amount of gunfire that was going off towards the front caused the rest of the ships that were not part of the attack to begin to panic. And the other ship captains began ramming into each other to try to get away from this attack. And so while that's going on, all the crew members on all the ships begin drawing their swords and running around, expecting the Japanese to board them at any moment. And the others that did not draw their swords put on life jackets and laid down on their back on the deck of the ship, believing that was procedure for how to survive a sinking ship. And so for the next 20 minutes, it was just continuous gunfire coming from the front of their formation. One of the attacking ships sent a message back to Rodospensky that said they had been hit by a torpedo and they were taking heavy fire, and it was just absolute bedlam up there. And then all of a sudden, it just totally stopped. And when the smoke cleared, Rodospensky and his ship had been able to maneuver up a little bit closer, and they could see what they were shooting at. And it would turn out, once again, it was a case of mistaken identity. They were not being attacked by Japanese torpedo boats. They had spotted 4 small British fishing boats. And in the chaos of the gunfight, the Baltic Fleet had inadvertently begun to fire at each other, killing several crew members and badly damaging
Fire at
ships
each
in the
other
process.
again, self-sabotage. Self-sabotage on the resupply ship. Now they're firing at each other. This is crazy, this story.
As for the British fishermen, only one of their boats actually sunk, despite the fact that the Baltic Fleet had fired thousands and thousands of rounds at them,
Thank
and they
goodness.
had been stationary the entire time. The Russian Tsar immediately apologized to Britain, but the British media went crazy, and the British people called for war, believing that this type of attack could not possibly be an accident.
I didn't
But
know
Russian
about this,
diplomats
like.
leveled with the British and said, no, this really was an accident.
Yeah.
And eventually they convinced them, avoiding starting yet another war.
Whoa.
Rojespenski and his Baltic fleet were allowed to continue in their journey, and after a couple of weeks, they were getting close to Africa when one of his ships, the Kamchatka, the same ship that believed they were surrounded by 8 Japanese torpedo boats, they got separated from the main fleet and got lost.
Oh,
and so
no.
Rojespenski and the other officers did what they could to try to locate them, but nobody had seen where they went, and there wasn't great technology to try to locate them, and so unfortunately, Rojespenski and the Baltic fleet just had to continue on and hope that at some point the lost ship would find them again. A few days later, the main body arrived in Tangier, and lo and behold, Kamchatka showed up. And they informed Rojespenski that they had gotten lost, and they didn't really have a good answer for that. But once they were lost, they managed to engage 3 separate Japanese torpedo boats. But it would turn out they were not Japanese torpedo boats. They were in fact a German, a Swedish, and a French fishing boat. But none of Kamchatka's rounds actually impacted any of the 3 vessels, and so 3...
They love wasting rounds on fishing boats, don't they? Damn. I mean, Russia at that time of the times of Tsar Nicholas II, it wasn't one of the richest countries in the first place, you know what I mean? And they're expending all them rounds on like just fishing boats and each other, you know what I mean? Which must be costing a lot of money. Mental.
More wars were averted. And so now that Rojespenski had his lost ship back, he gathered up his full Baltic fleet and they left Tangier. But on their way out, one of the ships managed to cut the underwater telegraph line to Tangier, cutting off Tangier's communication with Europe for the next 4 days. By now, the Baltic fleet was very low on coal, but they had a planned rendezvous with a German resupply ship off the coast of West Africa. When they got there, the crew decided they didn't want to do another resupply later on, and so let's just take double coal this time. And so they hauled all this extra coal onto their ships, despite not having a place for it, and so naturally they began throwing it in the halls and in their bedrooms, and basically anywhere there was space. And what that did is it led to a fine layer of coal dust all over everything in the ship. And that, combined with the intense humidity off the coast of Africa, led to this black coal gunk getting trapped inside of all of the sailors' lungs, which began killing several of them. A couple weeks later, as they rounded the southern tip of Africa, it finally rained on them, washing away a lot of that coal dust on their ships, which was a big relief. But the rain turned into a pretty bad storm, and so Rojespenski decided he just wanted all of his ships to call in and say they were okay. And so one by one, each of the ships were told to message him saying the words, "We are okay." And so one by one, each of the ships did this until it got to Kamchatka's turn. And they accidentally sent the message, "Do you see Japanese torpedo boats?" And of course, this message spread like wildfire across the entire crew, which led to mass hysteria, and Rojespenski's trying to send out messages to say, "No, there's no Japanese torpedo."
This Kamchatka boat, what's going on with it? I mean, where do they get it from? We're okay to do you see Japanese torpedo boats? I mean, come on, man. This mission was doomed, wasn't it?
torpedo boats, but it's too late. The other captains are panicking and they're ramming into each other and firing
not again.
blindly into the wind. From that point forward, every night, Rose Jaspensky would go up onto the bow of his ship and he would scream obscenities at Kamchatka. When the Baltic Fleet finally made it to Madagascar, the morale amongst the crew was very low.
I'm not
And so when they
surprised.
docked in Madagascar, the crew decided it would be a good idea to boost their morale by buying some pets to bring back on board the ship with them. And the pets they decided to bring back were crocodiles and poisonous snakes. When their handlers smuggled them back on board their ship, they immediately escaped down into the bowels of the ship. When they went looking for them, they couldn't find them because the ships were in such bad shape. There were all sorts of cracks and holes all over the interior for these animals to escape to. And so the men just had to accept there were very dangerous predators.
Yeah, exactly. And this comes back to self-sabotage again, man. You bringing deadly animals back onto the ship. What for, man? It just makes no sense at all.
Just living on their ship with them. And so most men were unable to sleep at night in fear of being attacked by these animals, which led a number of them to go for real insane. And so the pets idea didn't really boost morale amongst the Baltic Fleet, and so one of the officers decided he would take another crack at boosting spirits. And so he went to a vendor in Madagascar and he purchased 2,000 of their finest cigarettes to bring back on board.
Maybe.
So he brings them back on board, he hands them all out, and everyone's so thankful. But it turns out those
cigarettes or what? Come on.
Those cigarettes were laced with enormous amounts of opium, which
Oh
led
my
to hundreds of the
lord.
crew members becoming hopelessly addicted to opium.
Oh,
Also in
no
Madagascar,
way.
the sailors picked up dozens of diseases that began wiping them out in droves. During one funeral for a crew member, the Kamchatka asked if they could fire a salute with blank rounds. They were given permission, but they accidentally fired live rounds into the ship right next to them. When
my
Rojaspensky
God.
and the rest of the Baltic Fleet finally left Madagascar, their only refrigerator on board one of their ships broke, which spoiled all of their meat, tons and tons of meat. And so they began throwing it overboard, which attracted hundreds
Sharks.
and hundreds of sharks, which circled their ships for the rest of their journey. Rojaspensky desperately wanted to find a way to somehow train the remainder of the Baltic Fleet how to be somewhat militarily competent. And so he decided he would make them all do target practice.
This is incompetency at its best, man. Just carry on.
Because that had been a big issue on this trip so far. And so he had one ship attach a long line that was connected to a target in the water, and that ship would pull the target along, and the other ships would take shots at the target. And so all of the ships on Rojaspensky's call began firing at this target, and after thousands and thousands of rounds, they didn't hit the target once. However, they managed to continuously shoot the ship that was pulling the target. For Rojaspensky, this was the final straw. He felt like he could do absolutely nothing to make the Baltic Fleet an actual military force. And so he sent a message back to the Tsar and said, "You gotta replace me. I need to resign and somebody else needs to come in and take over." And the Tsar said,
I'd have done that long before
and
this.
so begrudgingly, Rojaspensky continued on leading the
yeah, you have
Baltic
to.
Fleet until they finally, after 7 total months on the sea, were within striking distance of their target in Japan. The night before, as they prepared for their attack, they went into stealth mode where all the ships killed all of their lights. They're totally dark, with the exception of their hospital ship.
Well, how many of the ships are left there, though? Do you know what I mean? After firing on each other, smashing into each other, I mean, how many ships have there actually got left of this fleet? You know what I mean?
That kept their lights on. This was considered a rule of war at the time, which both sides abided by. And so while the Baltic Fleet was sitting out in the waters outside of Japan, a small fishing boat began coming towards them. Now, the fishing boat could only see the lit-up hospital ship. They could not see the 43 other darkened ships. And so a crew member on board this hospital ship came up to the railing, and he recognized the fishing boat was actually a Russian fishing boat. And so he waved them down, and when the Russian fishermen came outside, the crew member told him, "You gotta stop, because there's 43 ships behind me that have their lights off. Do not go this way, go around." And so the Russian fisherman thanked him and turned around and went on his merry way. Except that wasn't a Russian fisherman, it was a Japanese sailor
Oh
on
my
board a
God.
Japanese torpedo boat.
Oh
And now
yeah.
they knew exactly where the Baltic Fleet was. And so that night, the Japanese Navy completely surrounded the Baltic Fleet, and then the next day at daybreak, they launched their attack. It was called the Battle of Tsushima,
Oh
and it was
my
obscenely
Lord.
lopsided. The Japanese Navy completely wiped out the Baltic Fleet, killing 4,000 of their crew members and
Wow.
capturing 7,300
I mean,
others, which included Rojaspensky, who had been badly wounded in the battle, but he was...
Rest in peace to the needless loss of life, you know what I mean? But I'm just so astounded by all the incompetencies and everything that happened along the journey, you know what I mean? But wait till it finishes.
Would survive. In contrast, the Japanese only had 100 casualties. This victory for Japan really marked the end of the war for Russia, and...
Sorry, I want to just go back a minute there because I didn't hear something. Sorry, that was my fault. Let me, just go back.
Of their crew members and capturing 7,300 others, which included Rojaspensky, who had been badly wounded in the battle, but he would survive. In contrast, the Japanese only had 100 casualties. This victory for Japan really marked the end of the war for Russia, and shortly after the Battle of Tsushima, the Russians agreed to surrender. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp, and if you're the first to do that, we will pin you at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already,
that was the biggest fail in military history. And I mean, I don't want to get all political and I don't want to get into it, but I mean, how appropriate from actually what country he is, you know, who it happened to. I mean, all that needless basic loss of life, it was a red flag from the beginning. They didn't even leave port and they were crashing into each other. Then they crashed into the supply boat. Then the firing on fishing vessels, the firing on each other, the thinking there's mines under them, crashing into each other. I mean, big red flag from the start. They'd lost 4 ships before they'd even got out of the port. So for me, it just seemed like that was doomed. That was a doomed mission from the beginning. I mean, that I can't even pronounce it. That Russian name. That Rojaspensky. He was captured, but he survived. I mean, war's not nice. Never nice for nobody. Nobody wants to be there, man, and nobody. I mean, it's, you know, like I say, I don't want to get into all political, but. I know I just want to see the world at peace, and I know things have got to be stopped, you know, but let's not take for the dark there. Anyway, I'm going to do another video after this one. I'll tell you all about it when it's on. Thanks to Kylie Nagy again, another excellent choice of a video. I didn't know where it was going, but the like I said, the incompetencies were just astounding. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. Please comment, like and subscribe to my channel, please. You know how it go, people. I'm out for this video. I'm Danny B, aka Stan, aka whatever the fuck you wanna call me. Right, until the next one, people, you know how it goes. Stay safe. Peace.